Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our panelists and guests. I am Christina DeCary, Program Coordinator for International Business Management Graduate Certificate Program at St. Lawrence College, and we are very pleased to host today's next webinar, International Business in a Post-Pandemic World. Thank you for joining us today, and please join me in welcoming Louise Chatterton, Dean, Faculty of Business and Community Services, so she can begin our webinar today. Louise?
Thank you, Christina. Pleased to be here and welcome everyone. And to start us off with a land acknowledgement. So I am in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, and where I am is situated on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. May we always be grateful to live and learn on these lands. So let me add my welcome to all of you. We have today people represented from 12 different countries, 5 different continents, and 12 unique industries. So that is wonderful to have you all joining us. And as Christina said, we're here to talk about international business in a post-pandemic world. So our focus today is to explore international business in this environment. And how should business leaders prepare their organization as well as their employees for a global business landscape that will be very different from the pre-COVID era? And I have to say, as a dean, I'm particularly interested in this topic as well, because I want to learn, because as an educational institution, we are preparing future business leaders. So what are the implications for our curriculum in the post-pandemic world? So I want to thank in advance the panelists that we're all going to learn from. So thank you to Shannon Ferguson, Robert Fosco, Norman Muzengamana, and Joan Vogelazang. Thank you for taking your time to share your knowledge, experience, and perspectives with us based on the questions that have come in advance of our time together. So I'm going to turn it back to you now, Christina, to get things started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. In a moment, we're going to take a few minutes to meet our guest panelists. And during our webinar today, panelists and Craig Erskine, who is a professor in the International Business Management Graduate Certificate Program, will explore themes as presented by the questions that you, our guests today, have shared with us. There will be time at the end of the panel conversation to ask any further questions. So please share any questions you may have in the chat. Our first panelist today is Shannon Ferguson, co-founder and CEO of FanSaves. Shannon, could you let us know a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Christina, and hi, everyone. I'm Shannon. I'm the co-founder and CEO of FanSaves. So we are a sports tech startup and a SaaS platform that helps sponsorship and fans connect through couponing. And we're currently working with over 40 organizations across North America. I'm a recent Wildlife Fellow, and I'm a strong advocate and supporter of women entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Our next guest is Robert Fosco, Vice President of Partner Channels, Export Development Canada. Robert?
Thank you, Christina, and bonjour tout le monde. Happy to be here today. For those of you who don't know, Export Development Canada is Canada's export credit agency. So we provide various solutions for Canadian exporters and investors abroad, whether it be financing, credit insurance, knowledge, advice, and connections, making connections around the world. We work with our other partners, federal partners, Global Affairs Canada, BDC, and others to provide services for Canadian companies. I've been at the BDC for over 20 years now. I'm a lawyer by training. I'm still a nice person, so don't hold it against me. Apologies to all the lawyers out there. But I've had the good pleasure of working in various parts of our business, and I'm really pleased to be with you here today to have.
Thank you so much, Robert. The next guest that we will welcome is Norman Muzengamana, founder of BizSkills Academy Incorporated and also a professor in the International Business Management program. Go ahead.
Thank you, Christina. Greetings, everybody. My name is Norman Muzengamana. I'm a newcomer to Canada. I've been here for about 3 years and a half, and happy to be teaching at the St. Lawrence College. And also, I work full-time as a small business advisor and entrepreneurship consultant at the Kingston Economic Development Corporation. I am very proud to have had the opportunity to join this community, and I'm really grateful for the resources and the opportunities we have, and looking forward to today's session. And really happy for the questions that have been shared with us. And we hope we can add value to entrepreneurs and businesses that are following this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Norman. Our final panelist today is Joan Vogelazang, International Business Management Consultant. Joan, could you let us know about yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. I'm delighted and honored to be here today. I also was an immigrant to Canada at 18 years old, born in England, raised in Jamaica and Trinidad. Chose Canada because I thought it would be a country of great opportunity. My first job in the country was with IBM Canada, where I became one of the first 8 females that went into a professional role. I then moved on to Philips Electronics, where I was the first female vice president out of 380,000 employees. And I ran the group that developed the first multimedia PCs in the world. And then went to Hitachi Data Systems as a vice president before entering into the entrepreneurial area of software development, where I became the president and CEO of a company called Toon Boom. We were very fortunate to win 2 Emmys, many multiple international awards, and we're net exporters. So 5% of our business was in Canada and 95% was in the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Now for our discussion. Moderating our discussion today will be Craig Irvine, who is a professor in the International Business Management program. Craig, I leave it to you.
All right, thank you, Christina, and welcome to our panelists once again, and welcome to all of those who have taken the time to join us today. It's wonderful to have you here. It's part of this conversation. I know that at the time that the pandemic occurred here in Canada, at least in March of 2020, I was teaching and quickly had to transition from teaching in front of a class to teaching remotely, which is something I hadn't done. And I also was working. I worked for Canada Post as well as teaching part-time, and had to transition from going to the office to working remotely once again. And that was an interesting transition, very difficult in a lot of ways, just because of the loss of interaction. So there's been a lot of change. I think that many of you are probably here because of that change and would like to know what it's going to look like going forward. So that leads us into our first question, the question from the audience that you provided to us ahead of the webinar. And once again, just to remind you, if you do have any questions, please do let us know as the session proceeds. So I'm going to direct the first question to Robert, but it's open to all of the panelists, of course. And the question that we're going to kick off with is, what are some business and trade opportunities that have emerged or accelerated as a result of the pandemic?
Well, thank you for that, Craig. And I guess, well, first of all, let me start by saying that obviously the pandemic has created much, hardship and suffering, both physical and mental, and so we can't lose sight of that. And businesses have suffered greatly, especially early on. Now, having said that, there are some opportunities that have emerged as a result of the pandemic and the coming recovery. And maybe I'll start by saying, in terms of recovery, you've heard in the past at the beginning of the pandemic, will this be a U recovery? Will it take time? Will it be a V? In other words, shoot up quickly, or will it be a W and go up and down? At EDC, we've talked a lot about a K recovery, meaning that there's some industries that have gone really shot up and will continue to rise, and some obviously tourism being one, the retail, bricks and mortar retail being another that will take longer. But in terms of the upside, anything tech related, so digitization, technology, ag tech, there's huge opportunities there, clean technology. So, and a lot of areas that Canada is very strong in. And so the pandemic, what the pandemic has done, we were already headed towards the digitization of our economy. This has just sped things up forward. So companies that were able to take advantage of digitizing their processes, really online sales, and companies that were able to adapt quickly, I think will come out of this stronger and better positioned to take on the world and really open up markets a lot quicker than they could have perhaps in the past. So digitization, I think, is the first. A couple of others, there are structural things that are taking place. We've seen an inordinate amount of government support across the world and stimulus packages. We just looked at south of us with the US announcing a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. That is a huge opportunity for Canada. As you know, over 70% of our exports go to the US. It used to be much higher, and we've diversified since, but that is a huge opportunity for Canadian companies to really get in on some of those contracts and the infrastructure that's going to grow us market. And the third, I would say, is around ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And the world has been shifting towards that. And I think, what we've seen across the pandemic and the confluence of events, whether it be Black Lives Matter, whether it be climate change, I think that has sped up. And so companies that really embed ESG principles and values into their business model, I think we'll see opportunities because, as you know, global investors and institutional investors are looking for that. And large companies are looking for suppliers that have good ESG programs, whether it be on in retail, for example, they have a human rights policy in terms of where your product is sourced from, climate change, clean tech. So I think companies that take advantage of that will have a net advantage going forward, and that's an opportunity. And leveraging the Canada brand. Canada has a great brand around the world, and I think we have an opportunity to leverage that brand with our ESG principles to give us a competitive advantage. So those are some key opportunities that I see, but I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists on their thoughts.
Yeah, and you mentioned adaptability, and I think that for a lot of us, adapting to this swift kind of change to an online kind of meeting platform, business commerce, and doing transactions over the internet more remotely. Perhaps a lot of people wouldn't have done that at this point in time had it not been for the pandemic. So yeah. I'm curious to see what other folks have to say about that transition and how it maybe has affected either yourselves or those that you partner or work with.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Shannon.
No, it's all good. You can go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that certainly the pandemic has provided opportunity. Having the technical platforms has increased the ability to be able to reach further afield. What I am concerned about is that people do learn a lot on the job, and they learn a lot from the cross-pollination while they're walking around the hallways. As an example, growing up in a company like IBM or Philips, the sheer experience that we were able to gain in building a plant where we manufactured 500,000 computers a year, that sort of process and experience you really get from being able to communicate with people in a real life situation. So I think going forward, we're going to see definitely a hybrid model of how companies are operating and how they train their young people that come in straight out of college, which I'm sure is of interest to some of the people that have joined this session today.
Yeah, I agree. Shannon, go ahead. You had a comment as well.
I did just want to kind of circle back to the digitalization of things and how we've seen that really boom in our industry, especially in the sports world. And what we were doing before the pandemic was relevant, and teams knew that they needed to digitalize their sponsorship. But when the pandemic hit and fans were no longer in the stands and sponsorship wasn't hitting like it used to, it was actually really good for our business because it was proving what we were saying all along. So instead of having to wait and prove ourselves, had the pandemic not happened, we had this opportunity to kind of jump in and say, this is what we've been saying, pay attention. And we are now getting these international sports teams and organizations paying attention. So had it not been for COVID, I think a lot of organizations, not just sports teams, might not have realized how necessary a lot of these digital solutions have become.
Yes.
So I agree with the previous speakers. And one of the things that I've noticed, especially when I'm working with small businesses in Kingston, is you realize that even in our local communities, in our local businesses like restaurants, businesses that have been able to cope very well, even if you want to do like curbside pickup, you still need to have like an e-commerce or a digital kind of solution to help you through that process. So in as much as we are looking at digitization of our businesses and we are thinking maybe more towards international markets, even within our own local communities, we still need some aspect of digitization to be able to help us to kind of what BDC probably calls future-proofing your business, making sure that no matter what happens, you can still wake up under lockdown and still be able to deliver a service to a client who might be even 2 houses down the road. So it's very important for people not to focus probably on the broader maybe markets, but also try to see how can we harness the opportunities that are closest to us in our own communities.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Absolutely. So we did have a question, and I'm going to insert it here just because it is specific to something that Robert said earlier. So question is, if US emphasis on ESG is minimal, what effect will this have on the rest of the world in your estimation?
Sorry, Craig, did you say if the US is?
Yes, if US
Okay.
emphasis on ESG is minimal, what effect will it have?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think if you would have asked that question before the election in November, I think it would have been a lot different answer than right now. I think what we're seeing is the U.S. With this administration has really taken on ESG as a way to do business, not just something that you know we do for the fun of it. So I think that the U.S. will be a leader, and they rejoined the Paris Agreement, and they've taken steps in that. And quite frankly, even if they wouldn't have, I think that's the question. The world is going there anyway, and that's where the money is going. We have to separate what company or governments may be doing and what the private sector and companies are doing and where the money is going. And so irrespective of how a particular government, you know, in democracies change every 4 years, I think the movement into our system of capitalism. It's become not just a nice thing to have or a good thing to do for the planet. There is a financial implication of doing it. And you see that with our top investors. And so I think, to answer the question more bluntly, I don't think it would have had, it would have slowed things down perhaps if the US is not there because there's such a big player and commands so much authority around the world. But I think that the markets will be leading this, and ESG, I think, will be real. Basically, companies study after study. Companies who would do ESG much better than companies that don't. So it's become an economic reality as well. Yeah,
I'm seeing a lot of the same kind of reporting in the publications that.
Can you still hear me?
Yes. Sorry. I was just adding that in a lot of the publications that we see from the large consultancy, you know, the KPMGs of the world and Aon and so on, we're seeing the same kind of focus on that. So I think you're right that the market is going to drive that forward, regardless of, you know, what direction governments choose to take.
Mm-hmm.
So. Could I make a comment, Craig?
Sure, absolutely. Go ahead, Joan.
So I find this a particularly interesting topic, and I do agree with what the previous speakers have said. But I think there's an indication from the pipeline shutdown in the US last week that there also has to be an acknowledgement that we're many years away from that pivot point that says that you can totally move away from fossil fuels or totally move away. And we're probably 20 years away. And so there needs to be a lot of thought put into how do we move forward with the new technologies and the new awareness of environmentalism while making the more traditional technologies cleaner, because this was an amazing thing that happened in the US with those pipelines being shut down, people lining up to get fuel. At the moment, there isn't a complete replacement. And I think that's something that we need to bear in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think that that shutdown has really shone a light on a number of issues, and one of them, hopefully, we'll get to in this discussion, is this cybersecurity issue around essential services and just the rise in cyber attacks since the move to online learning, online commerce, online everything, really. So before we maybe go down that road a little bit, one of the things that's kind of interesting, and we're learning about this more and more currently as we roll through the vaccine programs, in this country and internationally, is this idea that social distancing protocols will probably remain a feature of our post-pandemic life, and that many experts are actually encouraging that position. So how should businesses prepare for that likelihood, should that occur, especially those in the service-based sectors? And do you think that there will be differences in rules between countries, given the difference in the approaches to the pandemic and the stage that they're at in dealing with the pandemic? So will that make things more challenging, those differences internationally? So I'm going to let Joan comment on that, if you don't mind.
Well, yes, I do think it is going to be an international challenge. I happened to sit in on a talk with the CEO of Ernst & Young and the CEO of Microsoft last week. And interestingly enough, Ernst & Young have a very new, large building in New York that is almost fully rented already by high-tech companies. And as people are getting vaccinated, they're getting more comfortable with the idea and actually wanting to get back into work in some combination of space requirements, etc. There's discussion about having floors for fully vaccinated people. There's discussion around, part home, part work. And certainly there are countries that are going to have a lot of difficulty dealing with this in the developing world because the cost is going to be quite significant. I think the changes are here to stay, and I think it's very good. It's shown that the diseases can be limited in their spread if we observe, these rules, regulations. But we need to learn how to deal in a world where people are going to want to get back into a work environment, and how do we keep them safe?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And just, we're learning through the news and other channels online and otherwise, that a lot of the large event centers are offering vaccinations upon entry. And maybe Shannon, you might want to comment on this. So in large sports events, for example, if you arrive ahead of time, they will vaccinate you before heading into the venue. So, there's lots of other different ways that they're encouraging people, but this is one I think that is spreading quite quickly out in the world, because so many people are anxious to get back to those kinds of events.
Definitely. I know that our colleagues in the US are really kind of back to normal in a way. A lot of them still have restrictions in place, but down in the South, Florida, Texas, their venues, their stadiums are opening back up. And what I think is really interesting about that, while it is a little scary, and I'm kind of happy how we're doing it here, but what they're doing in the States is a lot of this rapid testing. And I think that, definitely vaccinations are important. But, I think having rapid testing accessible and available will help make people more comfortable as well. Even if this is when we're back in work settings or going into stores or restaurants, if we can all know and be comfortable that the people that we're sitting around or socializing with are negative, I think that will have an even better sense of comfort, in the sense that, we don't know who's all getting vaccinated and who is actually taking the vaccine around us. So I think knowing that the people that we're surrounding ourselves with are negative is going to be important, especially for sporting events, conferences, and even workplace environments in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I know that, just as an aside, that Las Vegas is having its first large conference later this month. I think it's World of Cement, if I'm not mistaken. So it will be interesting to see how that experience, moves forward.
Greg, I wanted to comment on that a little bit. So on Saturday, I happened to watch a boxing match in AT&T Stadium in Irving, Dallas, in the US, and the AT&T was at 73,000 kind of full capacity. Half of the stadium probably didn't carry even masks. So the question that you had asked is probably, are we going to see different regulations, or probably, I think that's the norm, even in the US, in as much as it's one country, we are seeing different states apply different probably approaches to how they are coping with the post-pandemic world. And one of the things that I think is going to be a challenge from a business perspective is, are businesses going to be able to have the resources, the capacity to understand what's happening in another part of the world? And it's probably where now, I know Canada has like trade commissioners in very many regions around the world. Is this now maybe a time where either whether a small business or a bigger business, is this the time where now we really tap into those trade commissioners, try to make sure that we understand what's going on in some of the markets that businesses are targeting, and how can we equip ourselves as businesses to make sure that we have the capacity to be able to tap into some of the resources that are given to us? Because I think doing business from a Canadian perspective gives a kind of a global advantage to many businesses. But how can we let these businesses be aware that these resources are there, and how can we prepare them to tap into those resources much better than they have done in the past?
So Craig, if I could speak to that, because it's a very interesting point also. In the situation of Toon Boom, we did end up getting 80% of the world market share within our space, which was technology for animated productions. So 80% of television productions utilize the technology. The trade commissioners and the ambassadors were incredibly helpful to us, including, by the way, EDC. We worked a lot with the Export Development Corporation in countries like India. They're a huge advantage to Canadian companies, I'd like to say that, because they can fund purchase orders if the company has good books and good numbers. But the trade commissioners actually believe that their job is to support us. And as a small business, it's a huge advantage to really create and develop good relationships. They can get a lot of information about what's going on the ground. And I encourage small businesses to use that avenue, because they are our employees. They're, sorry to say that, but they are our employees because Canadian taxpayers support this group. And so no one should be shy about using the resource that is there.
Joan, if I can add, this is Robert here. I maybe I didn't mention in my intro, but I did spend 3 years as a consul and senior trade commissioner in Seattle, Washington, and I can attest firsthand that we do have people across the world who are eager and proud to work for their country and help Canadian companies make the connections and do the business locally. We also hire locally engaged staff in those embassies and consulates around the world who understand the market and know the market and have been there and worked there. So absolutely, Joan, I couldn't agree more. It's and often, unfortunately, sometimes the best kept secret that we have this army of people willing to support and help.
So I think that's a nice segue to the next question, which is a new or different process needed for making business and trade decisions, or maybe for identifying opportunities that people may not be aware of, resources that they can take advantage of. Mm-hmm. So maybe I'll bring this back to you, Robert, to lead us off on that.
Yeah. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, so I think, Norman touched on this in a different way, but before, and I think one of the things that when we look at exporting and investing abroad, looking at our supply chains, I think companies are going to have to really take a closer look at their supply chains to make sure that they're diversified, to make sure that they have business continuity plans in place. We've just ran a survey that the Canadian companies, 20% of them have said their companies will expand in the near future abroad. So understanding where your goods are coming from, where they're going. Do you have different outlets in case, whether it be a pandemic or another world event happens? So I think that's a business process that companies will have to really pay attention, a lot, maybe closer attention to, diversifying their supply chains, understanding them better, having plans in place, really being agile. And talking of agile, Norman, I think referred to, for future-proofing your business. That is a huge, the expression I heard the other day, which I think was really on point. Adaptation is the new innovation, and really companies that are able to pivot. You've heard that word a lot over the course of the pandemic. Companies that were able to pivot their business, that have agile ways of doing things. That have, we've seen early on companies changing from manufacturing in any industry to making PPEs. But there are other companies have also that, going from physical security to health security. We're going to see a lot more of that. So companies that are able to pivot and look at their business processes in that way to say, how can we easily turn on a dime? How can we respond to what's happening in the world and make our processes such and our culture such that we can just change our business on any moment's notice? That'll be a huge going forward. Last business process, maybe I'll say is we touched on it, the workforce of the future. Really looking at, there was already a labor shortage starting before the pandemic. I think it's only going to be exacerbated. We're already seeing it here now as skilled labor. So what are companies doing to ensure that they attract and retain the right talent for their business? And remote work, and someone said yesterday, it's not just work from home, it's remote work. It's everybody has a different situation. Where can you, as long as you can have good connectivity, good technology, what are companies doing about that? I think they're going to have to turn their attention to ensuring that their employees feel supported, feel that they can work from anywhere and have the right technology. So I think, workforce of the future is a process that the companies will have to look at to be successful in the future.
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's going to be vitally important to get that culture right, so that the opportunities within the culture are available to those who need to upskill, who need to adapt their skill set, or need just to add to that skill set, given the rapid change in some of these industries and business environments. Any other comments on that?
I'd like to say, as you are going to look at different markets, which I certainly encourage every Canadian company to do, because our population is very small, and to grow your company, you really have to look at export. The reason the US, of course, is so important is it's the closest market. And so it is the easiest one to access at the beginning. But if I were to look at how our business broke down, of course, driven largely by Hollywood, because Disney was our first big customer, we had all the major studios. The next large market for us was China, Taiwan, South Korea, and the Philippines. But then we developed the market in India and moved on to Africa and the rest of the world, that it becomes very important to try to find local people in the countries to work with. Again, this is an area that the trade commissioners can help in facilitating those introductions, because it's virtually impossible to do it all yourself. Even if you do like the high level meetings or you're there for consultation, you still need people that are doing some basic local business. I'm on the board of the Canadian India Business Council, and we would dearly like to have more small and medium-sized companies, for example, associated with that council that does virtual trade commissions, that we frequently have Mr. Modi or CEOs of other Indian companies that come in. And I encourage small and medium companies to look at some of these organizations that can make the world a much smaller place.
Any comments before I move on? Because I have a question that follows up nicely on that one. Yeah, go ahead, Norman.
Thank you, Greg. One of the things that I think we don't really pay attention to in Canada is, if you look at the geographic location of Canada with the US, you quickly realize that being a small probably population, having a such large market next to us, and maybe the landscape of the country, the infrastructure, the way probably it might be a little bit expensive to to run a business in Canada means that Canada as a country and the probably businesses, they have to be kind of to specialize, to have like high-end, high niche type of products, which can easily kind of outcompete similar products, but which are not of the same quality and standard. And this is where I think Robert mentioned that we have a very good international brand as a country. And for me, I really think if you look at it from like a business process perspective, I think if we go high niche, high end, we are likely to attract probably newer markets, probably paying a higher price margin compared to probably larger markets or mass markets. And so what this means is that organizations that are going to be able to have an organizational culture that is open to adaptation, pivoting, innovation, are going to probably be very fast at harnessing these opportunities. And you look at, for example, the amount of tools that are available so there is a lot of data coming into our businesses, but there is also a lot of tools that can help us to assess these data and make very quick decisions. So businesses that will be able to do that, given the strategic location of the country, given the fact that not only are other countries eyeing to sell their products in Canada, in as much as we are planning to sell our products to the rest of the world, it means that agility and ability to make decisions pretty fast and execute is going to be very important. And I think as Canadian companies, there is a lot of programs, EDC, BDC. If you look around in our economic development organizations in Ontario, at provincial level, to federal level, I think businesses have opportunities to tap and kind of take advantage of this new normal. We just have to strategize well to make sure that the information that is available is shared to them at the right time.
Craig, could I just speak very quickly to that?
Sure, John,
The
go ahead.
company I'm working with right now on a consulting basis, we just had a signing agreement 3 days ago because we sold the Chinese business to the Chinese distributor. And Norman, you are 100% correct. The reason they did so well in China with the product is it had the Made in Canada brand. And they actually were able to sell it, believe it or not, in China for about 3 times the price that they could sell a local Chinese product. Now they're at the point where they're looking at cost reduction, obviously. They wanted to take that product in where they could manufacture it locally and go for a wider sort of broader market base. But I think you made an excellent point, and I just wanted to support that.
Thanks, Jones. So in that response from Norman, he mentioned a phrase that we've come to understand perhaps more than we would want, this idea of the new normal. So undoubtedly there will be some kind of new normal, and part of that new normal will be a change, and we touched on this briefly earlier, this change in the way that we gather and in the way that we travel. So what we're hearing currently is that undoubtedly the travel that when we get to that point, once we get to the point that we can undertake travel more regularly, it's likely to be more expensive, and it's likely to have a lot more limitations. So this has led to, of course, this kind of meeting circumstance that we're involved in now. So online meeting platforms like Zoom and Teams have become much more widely used because travel has been so drastically reduced. But, does this mean that travel and in-person interactions post-vaccination, I'll call it, will decline? Do you think that era, I guess, of in-person interactions, and Joan, you mentioned how important they were earlier, but how do you think that this could possibly affect international trade, business relations, and indeed interpersonal trust? So I'm going to have Shannon, if you don't mind commenting on this, because I know that a large part of your business is involved in this as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Craig. And I think, the first thing is to, it's really how you look at it as a business owner, right? So being like the pandemic allowed our business as a startup to actually get more international meetings because we didn't have to be traveling. Before the pandemic, we were traveling, it was getting really expensive. But we look at it as kind of a blessing where, you know, we've had this, let's say, excuse to actually set up way more meetings and be able to talk to way more business or way more organizations and possible partners in a way that might not have happened before. And I think moving forward, there's going to be, I think there will be a hybrid of this. I think that, you know, in-person conferences, in-person meetings, they will begin to happen again. But I think for those meetings that you really don't have to be in person, like you can have a meeting with, say, an investor over Zoom, and it gets the same point across. And I think that it will actually save a lot of startups and small businesses money and allow them to grow their business in other ways. So I think it's really your perspective on how you look at it. I definitely miss in-person meetings, conferences, and events. But on the flip side, I do see the benefit of, you know, we just opened our seed round and we're able to meet with investors all over the world, not having to fly to all different parts of the world. So I really think it is perspective, and I do think that we will see a hybrid of it, but I do see a lot more of the meetings that don't, or the events that don't need to be in person. I do see them staying online.
Yeah, maybe if I can jump in there, Craig, to say I wholeheartedly agree with Shannon, and it's nice to see that small businesses were able to sort of thrive and level the playing field with others, to say that we're all in this, we're all on Zoom, and so there's no competitive advantage. So the concern I would have, not a concern, but something that I think we have to be mindful of, that on the one hand, I agree, Shannon, it's going to be a hybrid model. And we've now discovered that there are things that you could a lot efficiently, maybe even online without the travel. Where I come back to the market and how it's going to drive behavior, I do think that the market you'll get to a point where, how does travel again or in-person meeting become a competitive advantage again? Oh, well, they come to see me. They're a lot more, you know, I build a personal bond with them. I broke bread with them. I mean, that's so important in some cultures, really just, you know, having a meal together and really connecting. So, you know, what's going to be the impact to that? So I do think the market will start to drive that in as we move. And then also, frankly, from the market will drive what employees would like. I mean, a lot of people enjoy their jobs because they get to travel and meet new people and see new things. So again, how will that be a competitive advantage for companies who are able to offer that to some of their employees? But I agree with Shannon, it's going to be a hybrid. I just see that the market's going to drive. You know, memories are short sometimes, and I think, you know, in 3 or 4 years that we may go back to you know, closer to what it was, but realizing the benefits, as Shannon said, of some of the meetings that, you know, now that it's not seen as awkward if you do it over Zoom. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
So Craig, I would like to say that I agree with Shannon as well, and Robert, but he made a very interesting point. A number of years ago, when we were building the market in India, we competed with Autodesk. And as you know, in software development, there's an awful lot of piracy. And to get people to pay for your technology is quite a task. And I remember going into India and saying, you know, we don't have as much piracy as some of the other companies do. So we never had to get lawyers. And the people that I was speaking with said, yes, that's because you've been on the ground working with us. And we appreciate what you've done, because we were able to take the Disneys and the Warner Brothers in and seed those studios that then went on to employ 3,000 people. And they started to buy companies in Canada and LA and so on. Without that loop back, you know, they knew the advantage, and therefore they were less inclined to steal our technology than they were the company that just sent in lawyers. So there, I believe the hybrid is there to stay, but I believe at the very top point, a lot of personal relationships are definitely going to come into play again.
Yeah, I think so as well. And it is a very different experience to have your personal interaction mediated through technology than it is to not have it mediated through, you know, a third party, I guess, apparatus. So
the offline conversations that you have.
Yeah.
We don't do that with Zoom. With Zoom, it's
Right.
business, business, business. But the offline conversations around ethics, morals, around religious beliefs, around cricket, around sports, we're not doing that on Zoom. I don't know how many people would agree with me, but we don't sit around at the end of the Zoom meeting and talk about the hockey game last night.
Exactly.
I'd like to jump in really quick too.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead.
Craig. I actually have like I wonder this a lot about, like, you know, the people on this panel. We did business, you know, pre-pandemic. So, you know, those in-person meetings, dinners, like in-office experiences are so important to us. And I wonder how this is going to change as Gen Z grows up and younger millennials start becoming entrepreneurs, and how they are actually going to, what business relations are going to mean to them. Because what I'm hearing from my employees, from a lot of the younger generation, is like they don't value, I'm not going to talk for all of them, but some of them don't have the same appreciation or value for those in-person dinners or those events because they haven't experienced it the same way we have. So I also wonder how that age difference and kids that are growing up in this virtual world, online schooling and such, how that will affect them, and how that in the future will actually change business relations.
Well, interestingly, Ernst & Young touched on this in that meeting that I was in. And they said that there's been a very big change within the last 4 or 5 months. And that you still have the group, and the group that don't want to go back to the office are largely people with young children who think this is great. They can go and throw the laundry in and they can do the housework in between. They said statistically productivity has gone down tremendously, and that you find 75% of the people want to get back to work. Part of it is they want to get away from the house, that their relationships are breaking up, the kids are driving them nuts, they cannot get away from their workday, and now they're trying to do the house stuff and this. So I think it's going to evolve. There are always going to be, after this, maybe 15 or 25% of the people that will prefer to work remotely. And then you're going to get the others that are going to really crave the learning experience, because meeting the CEOs and the presidents of companies, and of course, an entrepreneurial company is different, but a large company where you've got 300,000 employees, to have access to the brains at the top of those companies is a tremendous advantage versus just the people that are working with you, because the ability for growth is very limited. How do they get promoted? How do they get to be global thinkers? And so I agree with you on the one front. I know a lot of young entrepreneurs, and I think it's going to end up being a hybrid, but it's not going to be an all or nothing for sure.
Yeah, and I think it does, to Shannon's point, it does likely break down, across demographic, the demographic landscape. So you have the digital natives, the Generation Z, who, as you pointed out, likely are not going to value the in-person because it's not really their frame of reference. And then you've got, Generation X perhaps, and others who are the boomers and so on, who that has been very important in their development and in their careers. So what this looks like going forward is very difficult to, difficult to forecast, just given that we have these substantial differences in experiences. And because of the pandemic.
Facebook are sending a certain quantity back into the office, and people that work remotely, they are going to pay them less. So we have to understand that people that are earning hundreds of thousands of dollars a year are not going to get paid the same. And so companies see this as an opportunity to save money, less real estate, less pay because of lack of commuting. You can live in a cheaper neighborhood and all of that. But some of the leading technology companies are certainly haven't got, and in the call I was in, pharma companies are going to send all their people back. So, these are the massive companies employing a lot of people. It is different if you're in a company with 2 or 3 or 4 people, you've got a different objective and a different sort of goal. But if you want to grow your company to be 100,000 or 200,000 people, or even just 3,000 or 4,000 people, you know, there is a different perspective no matter what age group you're in.
Yeah, I just wonder, you know, the flexible work arrangements will definitely appeal to certain potential candidates over others, and that can, you know, lead them to exclude, you know, working for certain companies and including others and opting for others because of the options that they have available to them in this, you know, in this area of what we're talking about. So that brings us to the next question, which is, you know, the pandemic has clearly demonstrated that the need for organizational agility and responsiveness, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, is you know, more important now than ever before. So what changes do you view, or maybe what changes have you integrated as most important or most likely for international trade? And Norman, if you don't mind leading us off on this one, I think it ties nicely with what some of your remarks earlier.
Thank you so much, Craig. So I look at it from two perspectives. One is someone who's planning to start a business. So one simple example is, for example, if you look at the business Shannon is involved into, it's a SaaS platform that can have a client, for example, like in Europe, just like this. So if you're planning to start a business, and probably it's an online type of business, how do you think regulations such as the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in EU, is going to affect your business? Because it has really very strong expectation or requirements from business from a data sharing and processing perspective to ensure that the privacy of the citizens of the EU is well kind of maybe kept or guarded. So as a small business, as a potential entrepreneur today, I think the entrepreneurs are going to have to do more work to understand, to assess the opportunities, but also the risks that are within the industries that they want to move into. So then this is where, again, the conversation goes back to EDC, trade commissioners, and the type of support and service that you can get from those people who understand those local, those business, international business opportunities in countries where an entrepreneur is targeting. Now, you look at an existing business also. Yeah, we have talked about agility, decision making, and all these type of things. But we are all familiar with Skype. For example, Skype has existed for a very long time. We are all aware of the power, the money, the influence Microsoft has. But just because of something small as being agile, listening to the end users, being quick to probably make decisions, adapt, you can see how Zoom came in overnight and kind of took over from all these giants that we have all been knowing for all this time. So if you are an existing business, especially when it comes to how you build, develop, and nurture the organizational culture within your enterprise, if it's really built around not punishing people or employees for not maybe getting some decisions wrong, but more of encouraging them to explore what's out there and how is it that they can fit into the changing maybe consumer expectations. I think that is going to be very, very important. So for me, really, I think it goes back to two things. I think build, I think your business with, if it's an online business, with maybe there is a terminology that had come in place when the GDPR was new. People are saying that you need to build our SaaS platforms or our mobile apps with security as a design, as a core design feature of the solution, as opposed to trying to react to when there is a data breach and then you have to adjust, and which might end up costing more money, as opposed to probably developing your product with making sure that probably everything that has to be the payment solution or payment integration is handled through a third party. So when a data breach happens at your end, you have really nothing to do with that. So that's kind of maybe my perspective when it comes to that question. Thank you.
Hey, Craig, maybe I can.
Yep, go ahead. Go ahead, Robert.
I was just going to add to what Norman said, and two things come to mind. You know, speed of execution, I think, is going to be one of the biggest things that have to look. The world was moving. It's going to be moving faster as a result of the pandemic, and the ability to sort of make decisions, as Norm said, quickly and so speed of execution and delivery, adapting on the fly, and companies that are now being born global, calling it born global. There used to be a time in Canada where you'd start local, then maybe you go out of province, and then maybe you go to the US, and then you test that out, and then I think companies are now need to be born global and be ready to go wherever to new markets, as Joan was saying before, quicker, and to be able to get to market quicker, make changes as you go, as opposed to getting the perfect product and testing it market after market, because the competition, it'll be fierce. Things will move quicker than ever before. And so I think companies will have to be able to be agile, execute quickly, and go to external markets, diversify quicker than they would have before. Right now, especially if you're online, the market is the world is your market, and not just maybe staying local or just going to the US to start. So I think that'll be a key change.
I can piggyback on that, because I love what you just said, Robert. I think it's being born global is such a great term for kind of how a lot of businesses are starting today. And I find that even some companies, or even when I think of ours, we always have known we'll be global. But I think it's also making sure you're in the right mindset when you're thinking global, because we're in Canada, we're in Ontario, everything's locked down. And we were talking to a colleague in Florida the other day, and he's like, no, like, things are open here. You have to be growing into these markets. Like, don't focus on what's closed now, focus on what's open. And I think as entrepreneurs or people in business, it's easy to what you see, you become what's around you. So I think it's not getting bogged down in where you are and allowing that to affect your business, but really seeing what else is going on in the world and seeing where you can kind of get in those cracks and really grow into those markets that are affected differently, or that might be approaching something like a pandemic in a different way.
Yeah. Well, I think Shannon is correct, and the points made by the rest of the panel are superb. One of them that I just like to expand on, which Norman brought up, is the sensitivity right now around security and data. When we see, again, if we look at the pipeline, or we look at some of the things that have happened within our own government in Ottawa with the hackers and people being able to access banking information, which happened with one of our banks, I think this whole area of data security is really going to be taking center stage. And we cannot be too naive around the fact that there are people around the world that are desperately trying to get into your data and into your business. And again, from the viewpoint of education, it's a great opportunity for educational facilities to start to maybe teach people that this area will be a game changer going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and just on this point on cybersecurity and taking it from a different perspective, and I realize we are approaching the top of the hour, so we're having a great discussion, so I'm hoping we continue it for a few minutes longer, if it's all right with the panelists and the audience. So I just want to connect the cybersecurity issues. So we have this experience right now over the past year, actually, where large organizations like Shopify and Amazon are reporting enormous growth in first quarter 2021, and 100% year-on-year growth in shipments. So IBM has estimated that the pandemic has accelerated the shift from bricks and mortar to digital commerce by 5 years, something that Robert mentioned at the very beginning. So what does this mean for international business in a post-pandemic age, especially when we have these cybersecurity concerns? So we have all of this online commerce, we have all of these payments that are online payment systems, we have supply chains that are under duress because of the explosion in online shopping. So what does this mean going forward?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to be aware of is that the technology companies are very happy about this shift. People are buying more of their technology. So the more that IBM or Amazon can push things in that direction, the better off it is. I think that they also are going to be very concerned about the data management, because it will only take one real disaster, like a huge part of a country being shut down, for people to really retreat into a defensive position. So I think that there's going to be a lot of examination now about how you keep your customers' information safe. And I think basically, of course, I was at the turn in technology where these things were discussed a lot. I think people with the higher level computer languages became a little bit complacent and lost sight of the fact that if you're using the cloud or anything else, your security is almost zero and anybody can get in there. So the winners going forward are going to be the ones that really nail the security using the wonderful technology that we have. So I would imagine there's a lot of startups working on that right now.
And kind of going on that as well, I mean, definitely for our business, security and privacy is so important. And there's more and more, you know, federal rules and you know, local rules, everything is coming into play around security. But, you know, going back to the brick and mortar stores that are becoming more digital, that are, you know, doing more things online, I think it's so important for, you know, as everyone's being agile and adapting, and these small businesses, you know, we did a gift certificate program last year and dealt with over 600 businesses across the country, and many of them didn't have anything online. Like they were still doing paper receipts. So I think it's also personal responsibility of, if you are going to go this route and, you know, have an online presence, it's about educating yourself. It's about, there's so many, we live in a world where there's so many resources where you can go out and you can find out better ways to protect yourself, and talk to people, talk to, you know, EDC, or talk to different resources that are out there, because in the midst of everyone being agile, that's when, you know, the bad people can come in and do something, and do damage. So I think it is personal responsibility and business ownership, that if you are going to make those choices to enter the digital world, you have to do your research and make sure you're staying safe.
I wanted
Go ahead,
to contribute just a little bit to the beautiful comments made by Joanna and Shannon. One thing that I think many businesses underestimate in Canada is the level of support that exists and programs. Maybe there are too many programs for businesses to cope up with. But if you look at the work that is being done under BDC, under EDC, and Ontario Centre of Innovation now, I think it used to be Ontario Centre of Excellence, there is so many good programs where if you have like a program or a service that you want to probably establish online as a business, you can tap into some or one of these or a combination of these programs to be able to probably reduce the cost. Because one of the key challenges that businesses face is the cost of these services. And so if you can be able as a business to kind of reduce that cost by taking advantage of some of these programs, it's really going to go a long way helping and making sure that our businesses become safe and secure as we explore this new normal that we have found ourselves in.
I was just going to add, Craig, maybe, and this, it's like we've come full circle, and I think this is a good almost question near the end, because just like the move to digital creates security concerns, a lot of the things that we talked about and how companies can guard against that is, we talked about BCP plans, we talked about supply chains, we talked about in-person, building those client connections, those strong client connections, which are all things that you can do to guard against what could happen from a digital perspective and some event that Joan was talking about that could happen. So it's interesting that some of the things that you need to do to be agile and adapt and be able to quickly pivot and all of those things really become even more important in an era where it's digital, it's online, and maybe more prone to having things happen. So.
Yeah, and it's worrying that one of the areas where we have the greatest amount of available positions that remain unfilled are in cybersecurity.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we do have a couple of questions, comments that have come through. So maybe I'll share those before we conclude. The first one is that 50% of employment is through small business, and that would be in both Canada and the US and likely other countries as well. And as the changing model of business is growing, how do you see differences in culture and growth vary between large companies in international areas? Are there opportunities there? Are there challenges there? I think that's the spirit of the question. Any comments from our panel?
Well, I think one of the things, and Shannon has touched on this, that small companies have to be very aware of course, is the revenue stream. Mm-hmm. And so their ability, they have to optimize the money that they have to get the highest reach. When you get to larger companies, of course, their budgets are much higher, and therefore they can have more sort of pre-planning and more outreach on the international market. So small companies, I think, should always have in their mind growing internationally, spend the money that they have smartly, and then try to develop within their organizations that culture having a multicultural workforce, for example, is huge. Because if you have multicultural workforce, you cover several languages, you maybe cover several sensibilities, and so you don't need to double or quadruple the team. So these sorts of things, and one of the areas that we're weak in Canada is really helping companies with the marketing and the productization. We're very good at encouraging companies with the R&D, with the research and development. You can get enough money, you can get 700,000, you can get $1 million, 5 million, but when you need to get 20 million or 25 million, it's very difficult to come up with it in Canada. And that's when our companies pivot and take the money from the US, and we lose the ability to get those great incubator companies moving into great big companies. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to focus on. I mean, the small companies are critical. And how do we keep them here? How do we fund them for their marketing and sales and productization? And then how do we keep them here and grow them? That's basically what I see as the challenge.
Other thoughts or comments?
Maybe just to add, just to pick up on something Joan said about, for example, a multicultural workforce and focusing on that and the small businesses. I don't see it as a dichotomy between small and large. I think, we're trying to do it even at EDC, is how do you bring those small companies into the supply chains of those large companies? So you almost have a Team Canada approach. A lot of these larger companies, we mentioned ESG, are looking for companies to do business with that share their values, that have strong ESG practices. So how does small companies sort of get integrated into those supply chains of those larger companies and kind of, without saying ride the coattails, but sort of, benefit from those relationships and getting into those global supply chains, even though they're a small company, because that's, I think it would be a competitive advantage for them to demonstrate those strong ESG values that more and more larger companies and institutional investors are looking for. So I could see those working hand in hand.
I wanted to kind of reinforce one of the points that Joanna mentioned, because there is sometimes you look at, for example, the way Amazon is working today. You can order a product when you are in their one of their services. I can't remember how they call it. The one that where you get like a delivery in 2 days or
Prime.
Yeah,
Amazon Prime.
Yeah, it's Amazon Prime. So you look at, for example, a scenario where Amazon is able to deliver a product to you more than maybe a small business that is located in your community, and you really get a little bit worried because it was not by accident that Amazon bought Whole Foods. They have a very big, very aggressive strategy to be global, but also be local in our own cities and communities. So when I look at that, I get a bit worried, but I also know that the government and supporting organizations, institutions like maybe EDC, BDC, and the government of Canada, they're not sleeping. They are watching all these moves. So we have to strategize as a country and maybe try to identify ways to also make our business, our small businesses maybe have like their own platforms that can rival maybe the Amazons of the world. And when Shopify started, they could have opted to go for the Amazon approach, but they took a different strategy, and you can see how far it has taken them. And there are many and plenty of these opportunities, but the support and probably the financial capabilities required to pull those types of projects off are not really accessible, mainly in Canada. And you have seen very many companies here in Kingston, because of the entrepreneurship ecosystem we have, there is a level of funding that startups get to, and then they start thinking about the US. So how can we change that conversation and make sure that no matter the amount of money people are looking for, if they have a really good business, they can get these financial resources from this country, and that intellectual property, the ownership of that, the future benefit that this business is going to bring, come back to this community, to this country. I think that's one of the challenges we have.
Yeah.
I'd love to. I love that, Norman. And I think, my thought on all of this is just how cool of a time we're living in, and that we can talk, 10 or 20 years ago. Imagine like if someone listened to this conversation and they would be like, what is Amazon? What is Shopify? Cybersecurity? Like, I think the coolest thing about this pandemic, not that anything about it has been cool, but is how small the world has become and how international is really in our own backyard. It's in our own offices. And I think that, that perspective is what's really going to drive business going forward. I think that it's just given everyone so many more opportunities. And if you are smart, you're jumping on those opportunities.
I think that's an excellent point to conclude our presentation with. So I will hand it back to Christina. Thanks once again to our panelists. Thanks to you all for the conversation. And yes, I think we could go on for a lot longer, but we are constrained by time as always. So thanks once again.
Thank you. It's been very interesting to listen and to be a part of this discussion today. Thank you to all of our panelists. The generosity of your time and your expertise is greatly valued. Thank you, Craig, for moderating this very fulsome, interesting discussion. Thank you as well to Mary Deacon and Amanda Halton for making all of this happen today. Thank you to the Associate Dean of the School of Business at St. Lawrence College, Patrick Ibononyu. And thank you to Louise Chatterton, the Dean of the Faculty of Business and Community Services. And thank you, of course, to St. Lawrence College for its support in making this webinar series happen. Thank you to all of our attendees for your fantastic questions and your engagement. A recording of today's session will be shared with you in a few days. We hope to see you at our next webinar this fall. Please watch for details, which are coming soon. Thank you. Have a fantastic day, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.